Right, I think we can get started right now. So welcome everyone from all around the world. Thank you for joining our session today, the evolution of RPA. So this will be a fireside chat, and today I'm joined with Alex Dixon, a longtime friend, a past coworker that I work very closely with. We've been both in the RPA space for 6 years. And welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for having me, and excited for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. Yeah, so we've been within this space for about 6 years, and I've seen the product and the delivery side of the RPA, intelligent automation, broader hyperautomation, and Alex seen the sales and the partner ecosystem within this space very closely. So we have a very good understanding of the supply and the demand side of within the space. So our intention with this webinar is to educate the community of the future of work practitioners. So take this information, use it in your daily life as technology, space evolves, or the technologies that you interact with, as the customers that you interact with. And if you're one of them, think about the ways to implement it, and think also about the carriers aspect of the things. So we're very excited to have this webinar and to help educate the community. So that said, what are you most excited about, Alex?
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. The career impact is by far my favorite part about this space, right? So, you know, when we started talking about this a few months ago and about how we wanted to shape this specific session and the intent of it, I couldn't be more thrilled around that, because, you know, like you said, success for this is, you know, being able to share a little bit of our stories. Maybe we can inject a little bit of curiosity, maybe a little bit of excitement, and highlight where this space is going. And then, you know, if we can, in sharing some of that, if we can be a sounding board or an input for you and for your organization, wherever you are, and you know, in the automation journey or wherever that is for you in your career, then, you know, that's huge for us. And as practitioners, as automators, we're happy to be a sounding board and provide some inputs for you guys too. So I'm thrilled, as monotone as I sound, I'm thrilled about this discussion, and then really the career side of it as well.
I'm excited about it. And while we're talking, please feel free to submit your questions and comments in the chat. And at the end of the fireside chat if we have the time, we'll get back to your questions. But if you don't have the time, we'll make sure to get back to you and reply via email. So that said, what we are going to cover today is going back in time to early 2000s and go 2017s, 19s, 2020s, and then discuss a little bit about the future, what is coming next, what do we expect. The way we are going to do this is by looking at 3 categories in each year. So the first one will be technology, how the technology landscape has evolved for the success of the customers and created new opportunities for the people. And we are going to tie the new technologies to how they're adopted or implemented by the customers, and how did they experience and what they experienced throughout their journeys. And finally, as the customers adopt this technology, it creates more opportunities, new roles, and creates a new career industry. So we are going to look into these 3 pillars as we discuss each year category. So that said, let's jump into the early 2000s, which is the time of inception of the RPA world. So it all started, the term robotic process automation all started by Phil First, founder and chief analyst at HFS. And he introduced the term in a blog post in 2012, the article called Greetings from Robotistan, Outsourcing's Cheapest New Destination. it came as a response to outsourcing and BPOs of the world with low cost outsourcing and low cost transaction processing. And RPA was the solution that is introduced to help them bring more efficiency and time savings. So if you move a little bit backward, we can see that in 2001, and then the images, if you can think about it, we took the Wayback Machine and went to specific years on how the website looked like for these companies. That the 2001 Blue Prism first started as the RPA company. In 2003, Automation Anywhere, and at the time it was Teddy Solutions, was introduced, and 2005, Desk, or now UiPath, came into play. And as you can see, they pivoted a little bit, they iterated over their product, introduced new products, and the technology landscape was much more different compared to what it was before. And obviously we have the process mining manifesto authored in 2011 to tie RPA a little bit more about the process orchestration, right? The space was just starting. That there was not an RPA before this, there was no process mining before this date. Everything was just getting started at this point. The technology landscape wasn't as powerful as we see today. There was limited screen scraping software, limited UI capabilities. We didn't see much orchestration, scheduling. It was not there was no security in the platforms, especially when interacting with healthcare or financial data. There was very big lack of reliability, and the main need is revolved around the optical character recognition, OCR technology, to adapt to the changing websites. So now this is the technology space, right? And then now let's think about why this came. Like why, what did the customers wanted back then? And what was really missing back then that led to the RPA's inception and the creation of this technology that mimics the user's inputs and automates the workflows. So Alex, what do you think? What was really missing back then in the RPA space that led to inception?
Yeah, I think background wise in terms of technology, and this leads into the customer journey, like you're showing, right? A lot of the transformation that was being driven, if I can use the dangerous T word, the transformation that was being driven was application based, right? So it's the next SAP implementation upgrade. It's the implementation of a large BPM suite, 12 months, 16, 18, 24, multi-year journeys where payback period maybe is at month 18, maybe at 24, maybe doesn't come type of thing, right? And so the backdrop, like, Phil's article from Robotistan, and the backdrop of early 2000s and the labor arbitrage type of plays, combined with some of the exhaustion that we were all feeling at that time, with application-based transformation, created inception for automation-led transformation and a much more agile approach, a faster time to value, and a taste, the propensity for that, right? When you also have that BPO environment, especially being delivered through Citrix images or being delivered in ways where we have to manage the user interface, a lot of these tools like Blue Prism, like Automation Anywhere, where it was Tethys, like UiPath and Deskover, had roots in test software. And more complex UI-based automation techniques, which allowed to take an automation approach inside of that BPO environment. And so, from a customer journey perspective, it was kind of this new idea of, digital labor, digital robots that could, mimic what, the team that I had just moved to an offshore location to process invoices or to, to validate, validate journal entries, what have you. It was this great fertile ground for a faster automation-led approach. And I think that you had that BPO consumption, right? And that started to result in some cross-pollination into some of the enterprises who saw this technology that was being consumed, who saw the efficiencies that were being gained, and said, what if I could do that myself? And that also benefited some of the vendors who started to tell the larger, the larger RPA story to the market.
And that's a very interesting point, because the RPA's initial introduction to the world was more as an automated outsourcing. So instead of doing it to big outsourcing firms, why don't we just leverage RPA as software bots doing the same task? So I think that set the sentiment of RPA being very focused on FTE hours and efficiency functions. So as we discussed this time, and the customers started to adopt the product, doing pilots and see how it is, how was the careers back then? Like, if for anybody who wanted to learn a little bit more about RPA and heard the term and want to connect with like-minded people to figure out how to resolve the bugs or how to better understand to get the best out of their business cases, what was the landscape like for them?
Yeah, it was difficult, right? You had the BPOs adopting the technology, delivering it inside of their scope. You had some of these pure play automation consultancies and implementation entities that were being set up that provided a different route to consume the benefit of the technology. And so a lot of the enabling side on the career side that we see today wasn't there. It was just vapor. And what we generally saw in terms of personnel who were implementing this type of technology, alongside of some of those specific partners who decided to deliver it in different ways through management consulting, technology consulting, actually implementation work outside of the outsourced approach. It was a lot of focus around IT folks. So and in that realm, and what we saw was more it's another tool that's being added to the toolkit, but wasn't necessarily being adopted in a programmatic type of way like we see now with these large enterprise intelligent automation, hyper automation programs. So I think that vacuum that was created in terms of lack of clarity around the career side here created some really interesting opportunities for folks like yourself, myself, others to grab onto it and hold it, and really ingest it to further advance your careers. And the last thing I would just add to is, we really started to see in the mid 2010s, the dawn of those pure play intelligent automation consultancies like Ashling, where there was significant value, massive value that was provided just through knowledge transfer to large enterprises, large and medium enterprises, with how you actually adopt this. So I think it was a great opportunity for firms like Ashling and other automation advisories to step in and help.
And I think at this stage, the RPA companies also were trying to figure out what is their product market fit. And at the same time, as more companies were adopting it, they were seeing a lot of the gaps in implementing it. And what was the best way to implement RPA? What is the best way to train our people? Since there is no YouTube or free courses online or foreign access to information. So that kind of gave a huge gap for the services businesses to be able to come into play and help RPA to figure out where they fit the best. So if we think about it, so like we're at 2000s right now, and if we set our clock to 2016, that is when I and yourself started our career and entered into the RPA world. I joined the pure play RPA consultancy as an RPA consultant. And obviously the roles definition were not very well defined. Like it was, we were seeing a generalist term that who can do business analysis implementation. And then that kind of similar to a little bit of the old ERPs implementation coming up and the roles definitions as well. So just thinking about that time, and then this is the time of adoption. So the product evolved, and now their services businesses popping up, the technology are growing and hiring and selling the product. So how would you describe from your experience as you joined into the RPA world, what did you see in terms of the technology?
Yeah, at this time there was a big focus on unintended automation. So how do I look at this line of business or this function area and these 40 people who do tasks A, B, and C, and I pluck B off of them and I move it to a server rack in the closet to move it to digital robots or to digital workers, right? And so it's very unintended focus. The attended capabilities that we see today, the background processing, the multi-threading, the complex object triggers, all that type of stuff was not there. So the more dynamic execution, the blending human and digital labor that we see today, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that didn't exist. And so imagine a time where I needed to trigger automations based off of dropping files in a shared drive, right? Or it was when an email came in, but then I needed to make sure that that email was the right email with the right document to process, right? But oh, there's a document, and this whole IDP type of technology was just starting to really take root as part of an automation program, and so the capabilities that were needed, didn't really exist. And so two other things that would call out, there was a big focus on UI-based techniques and using recorders, and this was part of the sales motion, the general sales motion that a lot of vendors were taking. It was turn on a recorder, record your process, voila, there's your automated state. So that was one. And then when we talk about the larger automation ecosystem today and workflow and orchestration type of functionality, a lot of that didn't also exist to the degree that's needed. So workload management, queuing type of function that we see with, pushing different volumes to robots based off of, customer cycles, based off what's happening inside of organizations. A lot of that had to be stitched together. A lot of it couldn't be done as well. A lot of it had to be done outside of these automation tools, which just impeded the ability to grow faster. So it was an exciting time because the technology was becoming hardened. But constantly there were walls that enterprises and even vendors ran into and were learning together about, but that those walls inhibited the ability to adopt more and drive more value.
And I think one aspect of it is that excitement led to very good marketing around selling it is like a magic, right? It's like anybody can do it. It's drag and drop. You can easily learn. And then they were marketing very much the Citrix automation a lot as well because of the BPOs accessing through VDIs. But when you actually open the RPA software back then, you were forced to enter XY coordinates on the screen to figure out where to click. So it was nothing near what it was currently. Then which obviously then leads to, again, right, like the technology was evolving and there was customers ask around the back office, but still RPA was trying to figure out their product market fit. Like, what are we really selling? Who are we selling to? Just if you, again, we took the Wayback Machine, went into 2016 and how UiPath's product stack looks like. So at the time, the solutions are RPA, business process automation, accounts payable automation, but people really didn't fully know that the difference between an RPA and a business process automation, or what is different between a back office automation. So there are all these gaps, and I think from technology standpoint, this was the year where the orchestrator came out to meet the scheduling and a bit more of orchestration aspect of the RPA bots. So that said, let's shift gears to think about a bit of the perspective of sales, right? Like as this technology evolved right now, that we have robots, we have orchestrator, we have different accounts payable automation kind of proposals. What were the customers thinking back then? Like, how did that shifted? And tying that to the sales portion of it, what were you guys selling back then?
Yeah, it's fascinating at this time, right? A lot of the first excitement was around the enamoration of watching the job that I do with posting journal entries be done on the user interface, right? So I think it was first being sold to the business as well as with business, potentially implementing it with It's so easy, drag and drop, anyone can do it, right? But a lot of the first questions that were coming, as customers, clients were looking at this was, can it work? Prove it to me. You started to get some at this 2017, 2018, you started to get some inklings from analysts, from market research firms around commentary on how it's being sold and how there are pitfalls, how there are challenges, how some of this is kind of nirvana. And so there was a lot of, prove it to me. Lots of proof of concepts, proof of values. I want to see it integrate with Outlook and Excel when it's been done hundreds of times before, type of thing. So that was one aspect. I think another aspect which was interesting is the value side. A lot of clients at this time were looking at time savings or hour savings as the justification, as the funding mechanism, which is fine, but that's only one value lever that, as we all know, this type of technology stack can deliver. But why I called it out is because it set up some frustration, it set up some challenges as these programs were not necessarily being invested in, generally speaking, to the level that they could have been. And so it created some hesitancy, some challenges around further adoption as, we built this automation, let's say it stays in production and it's stable, but, does it actually release the value from that, task B that those 40 people do as we moved it to a server rack in the closet? So there's a lot of questions around value as well. And then the last thing that I just think is fascinating, exciting too about this time is, there was, as programs were not necessarily being stood up and invested in, people were reaching across the aisle between business and IT, working through organizational change management, what this looks like in terms of development lifecycle that's specific for this technology, just to name a few things. There was a lot of pilots and initiatives that were happening in silos and even under the desk. I remember, working with a client out on the West Coast, where we had, I think it was about 8 or 9 PCs, desktops that were sitting in a corner of this beautiful office in LA, but they were underneath the desk, doing processing. I think, forget the process, but basically executing processes in an attended mode because that was limited by the hardware specs on the device, and that was the only infrastructure that was available without going to IT for funding and for virtual machine requisition. So I think that's just just thinking about that story. It's fascinating to me in terms of what clients were going through at this time, just given how this was being sold, the limitation of the technology, and even to some degree the lack of organizational change management in the undertones of what this meant from a headcount reduction, and a lot of enterprises not hitting that head on.
And I think, remembering now, going again back to my first customer, there was a lot of sentiment around, will this thing take my job away, or is it going to remove my task? But it wasn't really, conversation wasn't like, take the task that I don't like to do so I am free and be able to do creative things. It was more like, why are you taking my task away? So people were much more defensive, much more protective of what they do. And it was, again, mainly because how the company set the tone with that BPO background, and then automating that, and just tying that to the article here from Guardian, right? Like, there are a lot of sentiment around robots will destroy our jobs and we're not ready for it. So I think that this kind of news and the sentiment and narrative kind of set a little bit of a bad connotation for RPA. And then you mentioned to me earlier about the ad display. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
About the
ad you've seen.
Yeah, so the billboard on the left was the same billboard that I remember landing at SFO in San Francisco in, I think it was late 2018, and this is still when a lot of even more forward-thinking enterprises are still just getting started in their automation journey. And I remember just looking at that as I was going to work with a few clients for the week, and I just think it's to me, there was two things. One is, what is the undertone? What is the the narrative that's being spun about this, regardless of what these RPA vendors say. But what's in our culture in terms of automation and robots, whether it's a physical robot, whether it's a software robot, right? So that would be point one. And the second point is, how did this undertone, this fear potentially also impact adoption as well? And a lot of clients would always, what we constantly hear in the space is, what's my next use case? What's the next magic bullet? And even when enterprises were getting started, sure, you saw some back office, mid office type of processing that was more consistent, maybe because of the cross pollination to BPO. But what I consistently found, it was more or less who found it first, whether it's through a conference, whether it's through a friend, whatever it was, and who had more of a forward-thinking lens and would hit the would overemphasize the change management, the organizational change management piece to their teams, to their line of business, to their function areas, to highlight that this isn't a headcount reduction initiative. And that really changed the demeanor of what line of business or department would adopt it. And so there wasn't a magic bullet in terms of where folks were getting started. And I would say it's more because of this undertone, and this has significant impacts by this undertone or this theme that's going to stay with us for a long time as we continue to explore this space.
And there was a lack of education as well in the space that I was literally asked that after we are going to deploy a bot to the production, somebody asked me that if the bot is going to sit next to them in a chair. I was actually asked about that.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's a surprising thing. So I think that kind of led a little bit about the education of the space, that like how can we have more knowledge capital, how can we have more accessibility, how can we share content with each other and learn from one another based on the implementations and experiences we had. And I remember at the time that both Blue Prism and UiPath, they had a PDF file that was like 100 pages long, and then you would all read that and trying to figure out. And if you're stuck, you're stuck. You got to figure it out yourself. But I think at this point that UiPath introduced the Academy, and that was very good. Like, this was an open, free, accessible for everyone, and in a way, it also tied a little bit of the technology landscape with the product feedback loops, and better able to hear what people want. And obviously the other RPA vendors like Automation Anywhere did the same with the free knowledge access approach, which was very interesting for everyone. So thinking about that aspect, right? Like as we learn more of the RPA, as we started to get into this space, it also became a little bit important that if you had a certificate, I remember people were building RPA workflows, and it looks like a spaghetti process, completely messy, and, and nobody knows what's going on. So it's like, then, okay, we gotta have someone who has a certificate in this. We need to have a little bit of accountability and verification here. And this was quite interesting at the time. So if you think about it, right, as the world evolved, and I'm going to tie this back a little bit for the year ahead right now, because now we have more accessible information, the beginning of accessible information, bad connotation for RPA, that robots are taking our jobs. And that sentiment started to slowly evolve into something different. And then that will tie to the 2090s and 2020s, where the product is now adopted before right now. So there's a better product market fit, they understand it more, but it's also time for scale and growth. Based on the technology, right? As it scales and grows, what were some of the themes that that we've seen back then within the technology space, and a little bit of customer space as well, that led to RPA being a little bit of something else than what it was before?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things from my perspective. So not only did the RPA and RDA, so the unattended, attended, capabilities continue to grow, but you started to see further expansion into the ecosystem. And so this there's a couple angles to this. So one was you started to see acquisitions by RPA vendors into complementary technology, and also build decisions for complementary technology. So a lot of the RPA vendors, built IDP tools. Given that that PDF or that image file was a major blockage point in terms of driving end-to-end automation, driving in their instance, more robot utilization, more licenses, right? So you started to see, some of those capabilities being acquired or built. Even things like UiPath acquiring Stepshot to help enhance the documentation, butting into the discovery side, right? So there's some interesting elements, which helps on your business case point here. There's some fascinating elements in terms of the vendors building capabilities. There was another point here in terms of driving extensibility of the platform, through marketplaces and through the ecosystem. So we're not UiPath or Automation Anywhere or just RPA can't be everything. So how do we open it up through connectors, through activity packages, through SDKs, to drive integrations into Alteryx or into MuleSoft or into Boomi or into enterprise content management or what have you. And so there's a big push in terms of the ecosystem at this time, a little bit before this, but also during this time. And then the last piece, perfect on the acquisition side, is that you started seeing non-RPA vendors, so just larger tech giants, pick up RPA players. Some of these were smaller players, some of these were a little bit larger players as well, but adding the UI-based automation techniques, to their core offerings. And so there's some interesting pieces like here where you had, Microsoft picking up, the Greece Softomotive guys, IBM adding WDG down in South America, and UI-based automation techniques to the iPath story. UiPath receiving Series E funding, but this really laid the foundation for further acquisitions and some of these integrated capabilities. Later in, if I get my dates right, later in 2020, Highland, so from an enterprise content management perspective, picks up another Monday. You have March of 2021, ServiceNow picks up IntelliBot. You have that same month, UiPath picks up Cloud Elements to add API, like iPaaS type of capabilities. And then even a few months later, Salesforce, so MuleSoft, an iPaaS API management platform, picking up Service Trace, so adding UI-based automation techniques. So, a lot of these technology started to expand in terms of function, not only in terms of IDP and analytics and process discovery, but you also start seeing larger technology players bringing in UI-based automation techniques as well to account for greater extensibility of their platforms, faster implementation, going on the list. So just fascinating in terms of giving more enterprises, more clients, the ability to pick up different tool sets in different manners for different purposes.
And at this time, I think it also became clear that the businesses were not getting the numbers that they wanted after deploying RPA because the business cases were not as accurate. So I think that created a gap to be a bit more ROI and business oriented as the RPA gets implemented. So process mining, task mining, analytics, these type of acquisitions of the products within the RPA platform kind of brought of the perspective that let's do a data-backed decision on what we're automating, where we are automating, so that we would know, we will have an accurate business case and we will know what we're doing. And I think at this point, the RPA talk a little bit became an intelligent automation conversation, and the people's general sentiment around let's get efficiency, let's cut FTE hours, let's cut let's cut jobs. So that started to change into a little bit more about let's improve the customer experience. Let's bring efficiency so that you don't have to do the tasks you hate to do. And I think this type of approach to automation actually evolved the industry to the next stage, where it is not just RPA, but more about broader transformation journey. So what are your thoughts around that as the industry transitioned into a little bit more of employee experience, customer experience focus, then go fast, go fast.
Yeah, so at this time, right, you had a little bit of the overselling of the technology. You had some clients who started a little bit slower and set the foundation up in terms of the operating model, development lifecycle, my post-production support strategy, how this integrates into my continuous improvement, my business process improvement, my lean type of process improvement parts of the organization. But at this part, from a customer journey perspective, you saw, from my perspective, you saw continued investments on the programmatic side to not only get through some of the turbulence of UI-based automation techniques and some of the brittleness that historically comes with, but also to incorporate larger tool sets that not only the vendors are providing, the RPA vendors are providing, and IDP and analytics and process discovery, that type of thing, but also incorporating other tool sets into these automation programs. So the question that I would consistently ask is this an RPA program or is it intelligent automation, right? Which oftentimes made people take a step back and kind of scratch their heads, right? Not that I'm a genius or anything, right? But it provided a different dynamic in terms of how to think about it because of what had been experienced from that organization for the past 12 to 14 months, whether setting up their program. And so there's a lot of inclusion of infusion into other third-party technologies, integrations into more enterprise architecture on the IT side in terms of understanding what technologies to really bring to bear. And then one of the things that I'm passionate about is the movement into the front office. So the capabilities that we started seeing with not only integrations into chatbots and conversational AI, but more complex attended, so RDA and unattended capabilities. I mentioned background processing, multi-threading, more complex triggers. That created a more dynamic and flexible execution layer for me as a human. So me being able to drive more human-centric automation in the front office, whether I'm an inside salesperson, whether I'm a call center agent, whether I'm something else. So really fascinating from a customer journey perspective in terms of continued foundation set, continued advancement technology, opening up new lines of business, new technologies being infused, and also the further programmatization of these automation initiatives, which then resulted in even more fascinating formalized career roles and opportunities for folks in the space.
I think at this stage, as the product stack started to improve with process minings, task minings, document processes, then we started to see roles of data scientists and ML engineers to work with RPA developers. We've seen the data science team working with RPA COEs. There were roles started to pop up like chief automation officers. And then this year was the year that I also became a UiPath MVP. And then I went to that summer before the process mining, process goals and acquisition was announced in Vegas. I met the UiPath community, and there were a lot of people with very different backgrounds. That it was not just RPA developers anymore. It was business executives, it was COE leads, ML engineers, process mining consultants. So like combined, it was very very welcoming environment and very different backgrounds, both technical and business. And I think that led a little bit of the transformation as well within the space, because then you get more perspectives, you get better product feedback, you get more targeted understanding of what is going on, and the tech and business speaking to one another more closely, even though not fully there yet, but it's when the conversations just started to happen. And I want to pick up the point that you mentioned, that it was also the beginning of the human-centric automation. And I think we've seen in 2020.
Can I add a point right there real quick?
Yep,
just 2 points. So one, you're very humble because this is the beginning of a 3-year run, an active 3-year trend for you in terms of picking up MVP. So hats off to you on that. But then second, I think even as the formalization of some of these roles started to pop up, whether it was automation architects, people throw around the word COE. Here's an automation program lead or a center of excellence lead. You mentioned chief automation architects, chief automation officers. I think the first one I saw was in 2019. I still think that regardless of the roles starting to be defined and being, being more solidified, regardless of the, academies and the universities and these vendors, putting out this content, regardless of, the partner ecosystem, providing additional advisory, there still was a massive, and still is, a massive opportunity for folks to pick this technology up and run with it regardless of your background. And I saw finance shared services managers turn into automation leads of federated operating units, and huge impacts not only in terms of career growth but earnings. I've seen marketing managers from West Coast based technology firms turn into director of freelance, contingent, and digital labor. So making decisions because he picked up the technology first. Was then able to then rise to a role where it's do we move it to a freelancer and a gig economy? Do we outsource it altogether, or do we push it to digital labor, robots in the automation program? So I think the point I'm trying to make is even as some of the structure starts to enter this space, it still is the time, and I still believe today that those who want to wrap their arms around it and better understand it and adopt it, regardless if it drives licensing and the little UiPath logo on my vest, it has huge impacts on the career, and that's why I'm so excited about this. But sorry to interrupt. You're going to continue on.
No, I know that those points had to be said, and it's very valuable because it brought the people together and then created an industry that employs everyone with a lot of different backgrounds. So going back to the human-centric automation and how that came into play is quite interesting as well, because now at this stage we no longer see let's go fast and FTE hours, but now we have a platform. People don't refer to it anymore RPA, they refer to it as intelligent automation or hyper automation. So I think as it became more platform, added up the low-code, no-code development, there was conversation of citizen development, which was not a thing back then. So the promise that they made in 2000s, it's drag and drop, it's magic. So now that is gone, and so it's now became a citizen development approach that has a strong value proposition. There's test automation, there's a better conversation around the pipeline management. So now we have like an end-to-end flywheel that has governance, that has measurement, and it has all the stages that you need to go through if you would like to be successful in the RPA implementation. So I think this brought in the conversation about the fully orchestrated end-to-end automation, where you can leverage process mining, get to the transactions, trigger RPA, leverage ML within RPA, and then use analytics to figure out how successful your RPA robots are, and report metrics to the business so that you can measure value. I think this life cycle brought very fast and very much more robust environment stage. And that said, there's obviously the COVID impact on it that made customers adopt the technology and go faster.
Yeah, I would ask the questions that were being asked at this time is, I've set up my program, so where do I infuse this technology ecosystem, this new budding hyper automation concept, right? And some of that was rooted in, where do I do that in terms of the right lines of business, the right departments? How do I do it in terms of, do I do it, with process discovery technologies or more, traditional hands-on activities around process optimization, application modernization, whether it's, master data cleanup or pieces before I incorporate this automation stack as well. So there was a question around, what do I do once I find it? And then there's also a why, and that ties back to the value piece that we referred to, but then also significant significant focus around that human experience, that blended, human and digital layer, and what that means not only for the customer side but also employee side. And so, historically, what you may have done in terms of, automating some of the self-service activities for HR activities across a 20,000 person enterprise or IT operations, you may have to do that. The idea was you did it through an attended robot sat on everyone's desk, right? But as this hyper automation concept continued to grow, maybe I'm delivering that self-service functionality through Teams and a chatbot, powered by NLP, that then allows me to move some of the actual pass-through reset activities or part of those HR tasks to pools of unattended robots as well. So there's really a big why theme here in terms of how does the human experience factor into this as well.
And this was also the time when the one office concept was introduced, with now back and front office that leverages the entire product stack. And it's introduced by HFS. And so it's quite interesting for anyone who's out there who wants to learn a little bit more about the framework. That is what the industry started to adopt and stop being only background automation to be more interactive. And I think that led to much more adoption and a faster, not only faster, but much more adoption and more success as well for the automation to be accessible to everyone. So I would like to connect this and just to make sure, right, we're running a little bit out of time here. If you don't have any plans right now, feel free to stick around for a little bit more. So we'll keep going to cover the last end of the deck. So for that reason, I want to now connect this to like one office, to broad digital transformation, right? That leverages front end automation, back office automation, and combined we have a platform that brings the low code, no code process mining and much more. The thing about that, and which is the area that I love the most, is the career aspect of it, because the job market changed, what people wanted change at the time. So moving forward, if we take what we know today and jump a little bit on the future, and think of the time of the orchestrated work, the live transactional processing, that what is coming next. That we ask the question that do we ever wonder the ROI on Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, or Outlook? Like these type of product stack is already given that they're going to bring you productivity and improve the way you work. So we were discussing earlier with Alex that it will be, I think the industry will evolve to see automation in a similar way, that the automation will be part of your life, and starting from technology, the products you use, maybe not Microsoft Excel, but UiPath Studio or pre-built automation, and the way you experience that technology through your journey and how that creates new opportunities for people is going to be very, very important. Important as we go into the future. So that said, I will ask the one last question around this. That like since the 1950s, people wanted efficient processes and increased productivity, and the technology evolved for that. So if you think about your kids, your children graduate from school and joining the workforce within the next 5 years, what will they expect to know about? Like, what will they do? Like, are they going to do data entry? Are they going to know how to automate some of their tasks to bring operational excellence? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you're scared. I have 3.5 and a 1.5-year-old. So if they live in 5 years, my wife and I will have a meltdown, emotional meltdown because of that. But I think for their sake and where the space is going, I think I'd say 3 points to say. One, the technology is here to stay. It's going to continue to get better. It's going to continue to become a more robust tool set that everyone can put around their waist. Now, whether they should or whether they shouldn't, it's an expandable tool set. If I continue with that metaphor, and each day we wake up, the hammer gets a little bit better. The drill has a better engine, whatever metaphor this is, right? More tools get added. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, in terms of more addressing your question on my children, I think that regardless of jumping into sales or HR or finance or accounting, there is going to be a need, an important need to understand digital, understand technology. That doesn't mean that that you have to be a developer. It doesn't mean that you have to know what UiPath is versus other technologies. But I think an awareness and understanding and a propensity to jump in and take and grasp it, I think will be critical for the next generation. And then the last thing I would say is, as we automate more of our tasks, and parts of my job today are automated, working for UiPath, there's a drastic need to focus on emotional intelligence and the soft skills and that type of work as well. So regardless of how much gets automated, regardless of how many bots are flying around, and every morning I get a chat bot pinging me on a few different things, like that's only going to increase, but it's only going to be even more important for us as humans to be able to to manage relationships, build relationships through the emotional intelligence and the soft skills that we have, to then adopt that technology and help it change some of these organizations. And on the back end, I think if you can recognize that the technology is here to stay, if you can have a base awareness of digital, and if you can have those soft skills, the EQ, emotional intelligence side, I think it just has huge impacts for careers as well, like you and I have both seen.
And as we discover what goes on next, I think take this knowledge of what we just presented to you on how RPA evolved from BPO to hyper automation, and it's much more transformation to citizen development, and then see how it relates to you, right? Like if you are out there and you want to join the RPA space, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will be happy to respond to any of your questions as we experience this massive growth. And if you're already in the space and you're experiencing some of it, new or old, again, we would love to connect with you, because I think that is the most important thing that led to RPA's evolution, that as more people from tech to business came into the same room and start discussing about ideas, that led better product market fit, and also better understanding of careers and what comes next. So that's it. I'll wrap up the webinar, and thank you very much, Alex, once again, being with us. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. So hopefully we will do one more of this in the coming days.
Yeah.
We don't have any time, unfortunately. Yeah, we ran over time, so we won't have any time for questions, but we will definitely get back to you via email. So thank you very much once again, and I hope this was good for you.